Hi, this is Jennifer Dang, and this is my presentation on rhetoric and pop culture. So my example was Sherlock, a BBC TV show that aired in 2010. It's a revival of Sherlock Holmes, the famous British detective who solves mysteries with his best friend John Watson. The Sherlock in this TV show solves mysteries in present-day London, and BBC chose to portray him as less social than he is in the original book series. So here we see John and Sherlock heading to their first crime scene together.
I'm a consulting detective. The only one in the world that invented the job. What does that mean? It means when the police are out of their depth, which is always, they consult me. The police don't consult amateurs. When I met you for the first time yesterday, I said Afghanistan or Iraq. You looked surprised. How did you know? I didn't know, I saw. You hack up the way you hold yourself, says the military. In conversations, you walk. You don't ask for a chair when you stand like you've forgotten about it, since he's partly psychosomatic. That says the original circumstances of the injury were traumatic. We did an action, Sundown, Afghanistan, or Iraq. It's drinking. How can you possibly know about the drinking? Shot in the dark, good one though. Power connection turning the scuff marks around the edge of it. Every night he goes to plug it in to charge, but his hands are shaking. You never see those marks on a sober man's phone, never see him drunk for nothing. There he goes. Right. I was right. Right about what? The police don't consult amateurs.
So here we see that Sherlock needs to counter John's implication that he's an amateur. He uses impressive inductive reasoning to get his point across that he is anything but. He explains how he knew so much about John from their first 1-minute meeting. Even if Sherlock calls what he does the science of deduction, he really starts from observing, collecting clues to reach a conclusion, which is inductive reasoning. That was especially the case when reading John, because Sherlock had not known anything prior to meeting him. So he had to base all of his conclusions off of what he read. For instance, his phone, his suntan, and his psychosomatic limp. So he also redefines what he does as well. He clarifies, I didn't know, I saw. He controls the argument here because he's redefined the terms. In the end, Sherlock concedes John's point about the police not consulting amateurs, but the concession works in his favor because he turns it against John in that he is not an amateur. He redefines what it means to be an amateur by showing that he is not one. So here we see Sherlock calling Anderson out for his bad example.
The name is her email address and all together now. The password is Rachel. So we can read her emails. So what? Anderson, don't talk out loud. You lower the IQ of the whole string. You do much more than just read her emails. It's a smartphone. It's got GPS, which means if you lose it, you can locate it online. She's leading us directly to the man who killed her. Unless you get rid of it.
Okay, so here we see that the bad example, or misinterpreting the evidence, is the second deadly logical sin. This fallacy is where examples don't support the conclusion, and we saw it there when Anderson misinterpreted the evidence, resulting in him lessening the importance of what Sherlock questions or discovers. Like Heinrich's example of the parent saying, seeing all those crimes on TV makes me want to lock up my kids and never let them out. Anderson's example of using the smartphone only for checking emails misrepresents the significance of finding the dead woman's phone's GPS. Okay, for advanced offense, I was unable to upload the video, but so right here we have Jeff, who is the cabbie, and he turns out to be the reason behind the 4 suicides Sherlock and John have been looking into. He gets Sherlock by himself and reveals his plan. Even then, he doesn't threaten Sherlock because he's banking on the fact that Sherlock, because he's so curious, will want to figure out how he talked 4 people into killing themselves. So what the cabbie did was he had ordered the 4 people to choose one of 2 poisonous pills at gunpoint. They would always choose the wrong one, while he would choose the right one. So right before this scene, Sherlock has heard how he did it, and he's walking out, and the cabbie here is convincing him to stay back and see if he can choose the right pill to take when those other 4 people couldn't. So Heinrich talks about code grooming but through Bush's Bushisms, and how Bush uses his male code and his female code and his military codes, and how he uses words such as believe instead of think to appeal to his religious audience members. The cabbie does much of the same because he really understands his audience, because throughout the last 10 minutes of this episode, he talks about how he and Sherlock are very similar and how they both have like psychopathic tendencies, and they also want an audience for their genius. So in this final exchange, he, the cabbie, like Bush, catapults his messages by leaving logic out of them. He doesn't allow Sherlock to get a moment of rational thought. If he were to stop talking and let Sherlock down the pill, he would allow Sherlock's mind to have time to fill with doubts. So here, in the example, he repeats the words bored, clever, and addict, Like Sherlock, he's addicted to proving himself clever. Okay, so for advanced agreement, an example can be found in the episode The Sign of Three, where John Watson is getting married and he has selected Sherlock to be his best man. However, a lot of people, like Molly and Miss Hudson, doubt Sherlock's ability to give a good speech because he's proven to be very insensitive in the past. So he needs to convince the audience that John's choice in him was a good idea and that he's capable of delivering a heartfelt speech that focuses on virtues, which is tricky for Sherlock because he likes only to talk about himself and he struggles with expressing and understanding emotions. So here's the video.
For the family, idiot. Or caprice, it is that he has many fine qualities of his own that he has overlooked in his obsession with me. Indeed, any reputation I have for mental acuity and sharpness comes in truth from the extraordinary contrast John so selflessly provides. It is a fact I believe the brides tend to favour exceptionally plain bridesmaids for their big day. There is a certain analogy there, I feel. And contrast is, after all, God's own plan to enhance the beauty of his creation. Or it would be if God were not a ludicrous fantasy designed to provide a career opportunity for the family, idiot.
So here we saw in the speech that Sherlock preempted his skeptical audience's thoughts by first acting precisely how they expected him to act. So here he concedes his really cold nature, and then here he insults weddings, and he insults John, he insults bridesmaids, and here he insults the nature of faith itself. And at the very beginning of the speech, it's not shown in the scene, but he fumbles and struggles to find what to say. So in short, he plays with the audience's expectations. As Heinrich has said, a knowledgeable audience sympathizes with a clumsy speaker, and that term is called dubitatio, appearing in doubt of what to say. This sets the bar low and shows that the speaker is really sincere. So after Sherlock insults everyone in the room, he goes on to admit his faults right here. And that's one huge concession. And then he also refutes what he said earlier by saying that he is too ignorant of the good qualities other people have. So basically he fulfills all rhetorical virtues. He gets a free pass for virtues 1, a proper language, 2, clarity, and 4, decorum, simply because of the nature of a best man's speech. He only has to be himself. He doesn't have to dumb himself down for the audience because they're already familiar with him and his delivery. He uses vividness, the third virtue, by first telling the story of when John asked him to be his best man, which wasn't shown in the scene, but mentioned throughout the speech. He makes the audience be invested in what he's saying and furthers their understanding that he was and still is surprised and honored to deliver the speech because he finds himself unworthy to be such a great man's best friend. Finally, he uses virtue 5, ornamentation, through parallelism and connecting thoughts throughout the speech. He constantly surprises by seeming to go off on a tangent about himself or about the cases they pursue in the later part of the speech. He always goes back to talking about John, subverting and then also exceeding expectations. So here is just dubitatio. And here's my works cited.